and today it is our turn. Sandel's lectures have packed St. Paul's Cathedral in London, the Sydney Opera House in Australia, and an outdoor stadium in Seoul, South Korea, where 14,000 people came to one event to hear him speak. So,
recording in progress.
Professor, I'm sure you are following us. And one word on the model we are going to use in his presentation. We are going to give him 5 to 6 minutes of telling us or arousing our curiosity about his work and his speech. And then myself, Dr. Muhoza, and Mr. Shidya will engage him in discussion by probing him with some questions, but on his own books, the 2 books we have chosen. And that will be the way we discuss with him. And then at a given time, we'll give some time for the audience to participate. Professor Sandel, please take your stage.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Muhoza, for that generous introduction. It's a pleasure for me, an honor to join you for World Philosophy Day. I might begin by saying a word about what philosophy is for. Many people believe that philosophy is an entirely abstract subject, that it resides in the clouds or in the heavens, far beyond the world in which we live. I disagree. I think that philosophy belongs in the city, where citizens gather. What drew me to philosophy were not its abstractions, but its ability to speak to the lives we live, to enable us to question the laws of the city, the assumptions that underlie our public life, and to explore the dilemmas that arise in our politics and also in our everyday lives. So this is what drew me to philosophy. I've always wanted to connect philosophy to the world. And today, when we look around the world at democracies struggling to figure out how to contend with the challenges we face, with the threats that democracy faces today, it seems to me all the more important that we as democratic citizens become philosophers, to question, to challenge, to figure out through deliberation with our fellow citizens what we believe and why. I think one of the deepest sources of the frustration that so many citizens have with politics today is that politics seems to be about small things. Public discourse consists mainly of shouting matches, where partisans and ideologues shout past one another without really listening. I think that that citizens want public life to be about big questions, including questions about values and ethics. What does it mean to seek a just society? What should we do about widening inequalities? And what would be required truly to bring about equal rights and respect for women in our societies? What should be the role of religion and traditions of faith in public discourse? What do we owe one another as fellow citizens? These are among the questions that you as philosophers have engaged with, that have engaged me in the books that I've written. Most recently, as Dr. Muhoza said, I've written books about two questions. First, what should be the role of money and markets in a good society? And second, most recently, what accounts for the divide between winners and losers in our society? How have the attitudes toward success that the global age has brought, how have those attitudes deepened this divide, poisoned our politics, and set us apart? So I look forward to discussing, Dr. Muhoza, with you and your colleagues, and to engaging with all of those who are joining us today on some of the questions that motivate, I think, all of us to take up the challenge, the excitement, and sometimes even the risks of engaging in philosophy.
So a round of applause, please.
No need. No need.
Yes, thank you, Professor Sandel. That is, now I'm talking to the audience, is the introduction, the probing, the showing who he is, and therefore it is time now we try to have you engaged, but the professor will be answering our questions, and we have tried to go through his two works. The books, one is Tyranny of Merit, what has become of the common good. That's the first book. Second book is What Money Can't Buy, the moral limits of market. So we start with the book Tyranny of Merit, what's become of the common good. Professor Sandel, in this book, you seem to suggest that the world is divided into winners and losers, and the praise is given according to what we call merit. So we get employed or we get different benefits because we merit that. One who is rich because he has worked hard. The other who is poor can only blame himself that he has not worked so hard to be rich. Could you enlighten us on the same concept as we talk of the North and the South, now applying that concept on the world as we have it today? The North and the South, the first world and the second world and the third world, I don't know. Could you enlighten us the moral implication of your concept on this divide? Thank you. If you have understood me, please.
I can try, and then I would welcome your thoughts and those of colleagues.
Okay.
I do think I do think there is a parallel in the way in the world today, rich countries think about what made them rich and what made countries, developing countries, fall behind economically in terms of income and wealth and prosperity. My general argument in The Tyranny of Merit is that in recent decades, those who have landed on top have come to believe that their success is their own doing, the measure of their merit, and that they therefore deserve the full bounty that the market bestows upon the so-called winners. Along with this way of thinking about success comes the tendency to view those who struggle, those left behind, as deserving their fate as well. Now, I'm critical of this way of thinking about success within societies, and also, to go to your question, to this way of thinking about success and wealth and prosperity and development as between North and South. I think one obstacle to greater initiatives toward social justice, toward alleviating the gap between rich and poor within societies and across the world, one obstacle is the powerful tendency of those who have landed on top to believe that they deserve it. And this forgets the luck and good fortune that helped them on their way. It sometimes forgets the illegitimate advantages that historically enabled them, sometimes through violence, to gather and accumulate power and wealth that other countries lack. Morally, therefore, initiatives for greater distributive justice globally and within countries depend on rethinking the ethic of success that leads the winners to the false idea that success is their own doing and that they morally deserve all of the winnings that come from winning the race.
Okay, thank you. I hope everybody has followed your reaction or your explanation of that. I welcome my colleague, Shija, also to put his question on this book. Please, the mic to him.
I am Shija, and my question bases on Sandel's book, What Man Cannot Buy, where, Professor, you are proposing that there are some civic virtues like altruism, solidarity, and civic spirit. And you articulate that these virtues cannot be brought in the market economy. So as you are celebrating World Philosophy Day, what do you think can philosophers do to realize these virtues in the political community, in a context Tanzania? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kuhumba. What philosophy can do is to equip us to engage in reasoned public debate about how to value the goods and social practices we prize. What economists forget is that putting a price on every good and social practice may not leave those practices untouched. Marketizing or commodifying certain goods and social practices may crowd out non-market values worth caring about. For example, some people try to encourage their children to study hard or to read books by paying them to get good grades, for example. Now, an economist would say that's an incentive, and even if the child loves to read, paying the child may get them to read more. And if the child isn't doing her homework, maybe paying the child will increase the motivation. But there's a danger, which is that creating a financial incentive teaches the wrong lesson, the wrong way of valuing reading a book or studying and learning. What philosophers can do to correct economistic ways of thinking is to say we can't know where markets serve the public good and where they don't without first reasoning about the meaning of goods and the sources of value that goods express, such as teaching and learning in the case of education. And so it seems to me that in the modern world, market thinking and economistic thinking forgets the need to deliberate as democratic citizens about how to value goods and what gives social practices such as health and education and civic life the moral importance that they have to us. Does that address your question, Dr. Kuhumba?
Thank you. The question was well understood and I think well elaborated. And we go to another question, back to the first book, The Tyranny of Merit. Here are young people in a university trying actually to be educated and get what they would think they merit. After they study, they want to be earning good money, living good life. And in your book, you seem to look with a critical eye on that effort. What could be the effect of meritocracy to the mental health of the youth who graduate from universities and yet lack employment and decent life they were promised, or at least they promised themselves? Could you enlighten us on that?
I can try. This really goes to the purpose of higher education. And higher education serves at least two purposes. One is to equip young people to get good jobs, to have satisfying careers, and through those careers to contribute to the common good and to make a good living while doing so. A second purpose of higher education is to learn to reflect on our life purposes, on the paths worth pursuing, to figure out what we believe and why, to read in philosophy, in literature, and in history, and in the sciences, to figure out not only where we can make the greatest contribution, but also what's worth caring about in our lives. This is the liberal arts mission of higher education. It's the humanistic dimension of higher education. Now, given these two purposes, the practical, career-oriented purpose and the liberal arts humanistic purpose, it's important that young people know and that families reinforce and that universities cultivate. Both purposes. The danger that I worry about, and here I'm observing what's become of higher education in Western societies such as mine, is that the careerist mission of higher education, the credential conferring mission, the networking aspect, threatens to crowd out or to undermine or to make us forget the intrinsic goods of higher education, having to do with growing in reflectiveness and self-examination, and also in civic reflection. So it is important to encourage more young people to get a university education. It's equally important to remove financial obstacles to young people to pursue their educational careers. But it's important to prevent higher education from becoming simply a kind of sorting mechanism for a competitive, market-driven society. Because if that happens, young people and universities themselves may forget the intrinsic goods of higher education in a single-minded focus on conferring credentials and defining the merit that a market society rewards.
Thank you very much. Now back to my colleague. Now Dr. Philbert Komu will ask you the next question on the book you have written.
Well, thank you, Professor, for enlightening us on various things that you have written on. And unfortunately, I must declare that I haven't fully read your books. But I just wanted to ask if it is possible to clarify on some things here. It seems as if there is always disagreement about what justice requires. So what will you personally take justice to be? And a bonus question on the concept that has been the divide that you have developed between the winners and the losers. I wanted to know the implication of your concept of, the implication of your divide between winners and losers to the concept of remedial responsibility. And here my question is, are winners morally responsible to remedy the problems of the losers? Thank you.
Well, by focusing on the second part of your question, the concrete part about remedial justice, we might be able to approach at least a partial answer toward the first question about what justice is. The question of remedial justice, of repairing past wrongs, raises questions about political community and identity. Because most people would agree, it wouldn't be very controversial, that if I commit a harm, a wrong, an injustice to somebody, that I, having committed that harm personally, owe that person some form of recompense or remediation. Most people would agree with that. But what about a case where a certain community or a country, or perhaps a minority within that country, have been mistreated, dealt with unjustly, historically, and continue to bear the mark of that injustice? Then the harder version of your question is, what responsibility do we in the present generation have to remedy injustices perpetrated by our grandparents or great-grandparents' generation. Now, some people would say, some people who hold to an individualistic moral philosophy would say, if my great-grandparents perpetrated a wrong, then it's not my doing to fix it because I wasn't around back then. But if one doesn't take this individualistic notion of individual responsibility for remedying injustice, then it might be the case that I, as a member of the community that perpetrated the injustice historically, and that may continue to enjoy unfair advantages associated with that injustice, then I, as a citizen, or as a member of this community, have a historic responsibility to remedy the wrongs in which my people or predecessors were implicated. What's interesting, and this goes to the first part of your question, what is justice, is a lot depends on whether we think of responsibility as strictly individual. I am responsible for wrongs I personally may have committed, or whether we also understand responsibility as bound up with a sense, with identity in a community across time, with memories and traditions that claim me still. Now, it's this view of human agency and of moral responsibilities that I myself have defended and argued for in my various works, including in my book, Justice. But the answer to the question of remedial justice depends very heavily on whether one accepts the individualist view of responsibility and identity, or one bound up with community, historical memory, and traditions.
Thank you for that clarification. And now the last question from Shija, and then we are going to the audience to hear if they can also, or they may ask some questions or some suggestions or contributions. Shija, please.
It's not a question, but I think it's just an invitation. I've seen that you have written a book where you argue for a communitarian way of life in comparison with the Eastern understanding of human being in the community. But also in Africa, we have the same parallel. We put the sense human person is understood within the community. So I think since you have explored your understanding of community in comparison to Eastern perspectives, it would also be great if you integrate your understanding of community in comparison in African perspective. So it could be a research collaboration when you could collaborate with our department or with other philosophers who might be interested in that project. Thank you.
Well,
Okay.
Thank you for that suggestion, Dr. Kuhumba, which I welcome. You've referred to a project that grew out of some dialogues and visits over the years that I've had the opportunity to participate in China. And we, at a certain moment after a number of trips I had made to China, engaging with students, university students, and philosophy colleagues, we had a gathering in China to discuss points of contact, similarities and differences between my my philosophical arguments within the Western political tradition. Possible points of contact between my arguments and Chinese philosophical traditions. I have been a critic of the excesses of Western individualism. This is related to the book you mentioned earlier on what money can't buy, the moral limits of markets. I've been critical of the excesses of individualism. And I've argued for a conception of the human person that is embedded in or situated in community, history, memory. And I've tried to explore the philosophical implications of that way of thinking about the human person. And so the exploration with Chinese colleagues was to see whether there were certain similarities and resonances between this notion, the notion of the human person that I had argued for within Western philosophy, and the way Chinese philosophy conceives the relation between persons and their circumstance, their situation. And I learned a great deal from that. And I would welcome the opportunity to learn from you and the colleagues gathered here on this World Philosophy Day, to learn more about African philosophical traditions and to explore similarities and differences, points of contact, perhaps, between the philosophical work that I've tried to do and the work that you are engaged in. And I think that if philosophy is about examining our own assumptions, an important expression of philosophy is to collaborate in studying together, coming together to study together our respective philosophical traditions. So the short answer, Shuja, is yes. I would love that if we can find ways of organizing it and pursuing it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your invitation to have a partnership or a kind of collaboration. And therefore, that ends our probing and our asking of him from his books. But now the reaction of the audience to Professor's discussion. That part I welcome Dr. Komu to lead the discussion because I have to prepare the following topic.
Well, before we go for questions from the audience, I would love you to give a round of applause to Professor Michael Sandel, please. And a round of applause to our lead discussants as well. And now I see a hand on the left. Thank you. So we'll allow about 3 questions, short, less than half a minute. Karibu.
Good afternoon. Okay, my name is Jacqueline, a student of Masters of Arts in Ethics of Governance and Public Service. I'm sorry, but my question was from the previous discussion regarding the book of Tyranny of Merit. So, according to the professor, he argued that it is wrong to base on a university degree as the condition for a decent life. So my question is, what should the economy be based on if, according to the book, a university degree should not be a necessary condition for a decent life? So what should the economy be based on?
Thank you, Jacqueline, for the question. Another 2 questions, then we go back to Professor Sandel. Karibu.
Good afternoon. Okay, my name is Patrick Maro, a teacher from Kauroro Secondary School in Bukoba. My question to Professor Sandel is about how the Charles Darwin theory affected the modern philosophy. Because I was trying to listen from him, when he was explaining about his book, Tyranny of Merit, it seems that there is a kind of relationship, or the modern philosopher or philosophy are affected directly with the Charles Darwin theory, survival for fittest. That is my question.
Thank you for the
I'm
question.
sorry, what theory? Can you say it again? With what theory?
He said Charles Darwin theory, survival for the fittest.
Charles Darwin. Okay.
Okay, yeah. Now I see Professor's hand. In front here, please. Okay, one more hand behind there.
Thank you. My name is Henry Tem. I'm third year philosophy. I'm studying philosophy and ethics. I'm third year. My question is, the book of What Money Cannot Buy, it seems that it is very relevant to today's generation. So, Professor, what is your commentation on today's world? Because every day, and as days goes on, we are used to tell each other, find money, find money, find money. If you say I'm hungry, find money. If you say I'm lonely, find money. If you say I'm sad, you are being told to find money. So what is your commentation on this generation? What are you advising them? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the questions. And now back to Professor Michael Sandel. Kindly address those questions.
Well, thank you, all three of you, for the questions. To begin with the last question, Henry, it's interesting, your observation, that especially in this generation, money is seen as the solution to everything, not only to material deprivation, but to loneliness even. And this is a condition I think we need to call into question and ask how we can gain the benefits of markets, of market economies, without transforming our societies into places where everything is up for sale, including even personal relations, human intimacy, civic life. And what I think has happened is that in recent decades, and this I think is true in countries around the world, we have shifted from having market economies to becoming market societies. Henry, I think that's what you're really describing. A market economy is a tool. It's a valuable and effective tool for organizing productive activity. But a market society is a place where everything is up for sale. And I think we need to resist becoming market societies where money is the answer to everything. And that means reflecting on the value and meaning of the social practices we care about that cannot be translated into financial or economic terms. As for Patrick's question about the parallel between a competitive meritocratic society and the theories of Charles Darwin, I do think there is a parallel. In fact, some have written historically in defense of what they call social Darwinism, which is the idea that the fittest, the strongest, should prevail in social life and in economic life. This is very close to the harsh ethic of success that has driven us apart in recent decades. and that divides us into societies of winners and losers. And I think this is a mistake. I think this is a wrong turn, this Darwinistic impulse, which is why I think we need to remind ourselves of, especially the successful, we need to remind ourselves of the role of luck in our achievements, and also to remind ourselves of our indebtedness to those who make our achievements possible. As for Jacqueline's question, and it's a challenging question, what is the alternative to thinking of a university degree as the way to the good life? Because here we have a lot of university students, a lot of university graduates gathered here. And we're told as we're growing up, all of us, that if you study hard, and if you gain admission to the university, and if you do well in university, then you will deserve and you will have access to a good life, and a prosperous life, and a good job. But Jacqueline wants to know, if I'm critical of that idea, what's my alternative? First, let me emphasize, I am not critical of the idea of encouraging young people and more young people to go to university. That's a good thing. That's an important thing. But I am critical of creating a society that allocates a good and decent life only to those with a university degree. That's what I'm against. And so, Jacqueline, you want to know, well, what's the alternative? What should be the basis for affording people a good life, a decent life? I would say not a university degree, but fundamentally a respect for human dignity and a respect for our, and a recognition of our mutual responsibility for everyone in our society, whether or not they've had the good fortune to achieve a university degree. Now, it will still be true that those who get access to higher education will have greater responsibilities, will have careers, professional careers, for example, that carry special responsibilities. But I think we should consider access to a university education not as an entitlement to a well-paying job, but as the source of an obligation to draw upon our advantages, our education, to contribute to the common good, to make life better for everyone, not only those who, like us, have had the privilege and the good fortune to achieve a university degree. I hope that's at least a beginning of an answer, and if we had a longer time, what I would really love to do would be to put some questions to all of you and to engage in conversation, discussion, and debate, because philosophy ultimately is not a matter of giving the right answer to a question. Philosophy is a matter of probing and exploring and thinking critically about the assumptions that inform our common life. And philosophy understood in this way is best done by deliberating and reasoning and arguing and reflecting together. Thank you all very much.
Well, unfortunately, Professor Michael Sandel, we really wanted to keep listening to you, but unfortunately time is what we don't have. On behalf of everybody present here, I would love to personally thank you for being ready to present to us, and you can be sure that you inspired a lot of young minds here, and you are becoming not only an inspiration but a role model to young scholars around here. I would love you to give him a round of applause once again, please.
Thank you. Thank you.
And please be ready to join us whenever we need you to feed us with this intellectual food and philosophical arguments. Right now, I will again continue with the next category. Unfortunately, we will have to skip the presentation for Dr. Muhoza, who is with us here, because the time for the presentation from Professor Thomas Podge. I hope, Thomas Podge, you are ready.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thomas Podge, Professor, you're welcome. And to introduce you for your presentation today, I would love to invite on stage our colleague from the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies, Mr. Jackson Coy.
It's my great pleasure to introduce a renowned scholar, Professor Thomas Podge. Professor Thomas Podge has received his PhD in philosophy from Harvard. Thomas Podge is a Lieutenant Professor of Philosophy and International Affairs and founding director of the Global Justice Program at Yale. He co-founded Academics Stand Against Poverty, an international network aiming to enhance the impact of scholars, teachers, and students on global poverty and incentives for global health, a team effort toward creating new incentives that will improve access to advanced pharmaceutical worldwide. More of his information is available in the website that is written in this abstract book. And for more information about him, also you can consult the department members. Professor Thomas Podge, welcome.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Very happy to be here. And I will talk to you today about monopolies and how they work and how they might be replaceable. So let's start with the rhetoric. Governments are committed to a world in which human rights are fulfilled, and among the human rights we find the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of oneself and one's family, including food, clothing, housing, medical care. And we also read there in the Universal Declaration that everyone is entitled to a social and international order in which the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration can be fully realized. Now, if we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, which govern the period from 2015 to 2030, we find similar, more specific, but similar goals to avoid and eradicate hunger, poverty, excessive inequality, and so on. And the big slogan is, leave no one behind. That is the slogan of the SDGs. Now, if you look at the reality, even the numbers that our own governments are publishing, you can see that the reality looks quite different. I don't know whether you are aware of these numbers, but they come from the latest FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, annual report. And you find there that the number of food insecure people has been rising not only with the COVID epidemic, but has been rising every single year since 2014 to a current level of 2.4, almost 2.4 billion people. These are people who occasionally suffer hunger, at least occasionally, often, of course, as a daily occurrence. You also find lower down the statistic about people who are unable to afford a healthy diet, and that number now exceeds 3 billion people. There are about 7.9 billion people in the world, so 41.9% of the people they have data about are unable to afford a healthy diet. In Africa, that is 80.2% of the African population, and the tendency is rising from 2017 to 2019 and went up 5.4%. So despite all this great rhetoric about how we are working very hard to eradicate poverty, the opposite is happening. It's getting worse, and it affects an incredible number of people. Now, I think that a major part of the explanation of this are supranational structures, the way that we organize our world. And by supranational structures, I mean 4 things in particular. I mean the institutional and legal arrangements, such as the organization of our global economy and of international political decision-making. Who makes these decisions? Who sits at the table? Who gets to participate? Then I also mean supranational practices, customs, and habits, the international physical infrastructure. Where is the manufacturing located? How does transportation, energy, water, communications, and so on, how do these work? And finally, the global physical environment as continually modified by the way populations interact with it. Now, I will focus today's lecture just on one single example of such a structure, and that is how we organize innovation in our world. The regime governing innovation, intellectual property rights. This regime was created in 1994 when nations got together in the Uruguay round to found the World Trade Organization. And as part of the World Trade Organization, they created a global one-size-fits-all intellectual property regime that is called TRIPS. The TRIPS agreement came into force on the 1st of January 1995, and the poorest countries had to subscribe to it in 10 years later, on the 1st of January 2005. The key provision of TRIPS is that innovators are entitled to 20-year product patents on any innovation, which is meant to allow them to recoup their research and development investments from early users, because with a monopoly, they don't have to fear competition and can just mark up or license their product against a fee. Now, there are 3 main problems of this kind of innovation regime. The first and most obvious problem is that it leads to high prices. You have a valuable innovation. You are the only one who can offer this innovation, manufacture it, and offer it for sale. And so you try to raise the price as high as feasible in order to make as much profit as possible. That leads to exclusion of poor people and underutilization of the innovation, as few people, relatively few people, have the money to use it. Here's an example. Sofosbuvir is a drug for hepatitis C. It was introduced in the US in 2013 at $84,000 per course of treatment, which is more than 1,000 times the manufacturing cost. It costs maybe $60, $80 to manufacture, but Americans were asked to pay $84,000. It's cheaper in developing countries, but still unaffordable for most people in those countries. Now, why are prices so high? They are high because of the shape of the demand curve, because there's very much inequality in the world, and the majority of poor people in the world are simply not worth bothering with. You see this here at this simple graph. The red line is the demand curve. How much demand is there at any given price? The higher you set the price, the fewer people will be willing and able to buy the product. So the monopolist will try to maximize the area in this rectangle here. So you can see if I lower the price below 40 to 20, I lose money. I'm worse off because, yes, I have more customers, but because I make less profit on each of these customers, I make, in the end, less money overall. On the other hand, if I raise the price to 100, I make more money than before because I gain more from the higher markup than I lose from the smaller sales volume. And so in a world of very high inequality, we can expect extremely high prices to be profit maximizing, and that is exactly what we find, for example, in the pharmaceutical industry, where, as I said, prices can be 1,000 times cost of production or even more. Now, there are generic manufacturers, companies that would gladly manufacture the drug and sell it very cheaply to people in the developing world. But with the TRIPS agreement, they are no longer allowed to do that. Countries in the global south are required to enforce patents, and so millions of people every year suffer or even die because they cannot get access to advanced medicines that would cure their disease or treat their disease in other ways. Now, granting and enforcing patents is something that the poorer countries do not really want to do, but they must do it as a price of membership in the World Trade Organization, which gives them favorable export opportunities into the richer countries. So here, the richer countries, by demanding this kind of patent enforcement from the poorer countries, are really harming large populations in the global south. It's not a failure to help, it is an active harm by arm twisting the governments of the south into acceding to the TRIPS agreement and into enforcing these patents and thereby cutting off poor patients from access to advanced medicines that manufacturers in the global south would be very willing and able to provide at low prices. So high prices also cause underutilization, right? We had just had the COP agreement the COP meeting in Glasgow, and everybody's talking about how the global south should also help in introducing green technologies and reducing emissions. But the North is saying to the South, by the way, if you want to do that, if you want to use green technologies, then you have to pay us markups and licensing fees because we own the intellectual property rights on these green technologies. And again, you see the madness of the present system. The whole world is hoping that we can reduce emissions through better green technologies, but we are allowing innovator companies who are mostly in the north because that's where the investment capital is, we are allowing these innovators to charge high licensing fees and high markups on these green technologies. And so we make these green technologies artificially more expensive than the old dirty technologies that are no longer under patents. So it's not just that we are excluding the poor, we are also risking the future of our planet through this mad system of intellectual property rights. Now, in defense of the current regime, it's often said that without these monopolies, without giving innovators the possibility to charge these high prices and licensing fees, innovations would dry up, they would not exist. But this is true only if there is not another way, a better way of incentivizing and rewarding innovation. in the pharma sector, in the green technology sector. And I want to show you that there is a much better way, and that this much better way is what we should introduce. But before I do that, let me mention two other big problems with the existing regime. One problem is that it ignores externalities. When you ask yourself whether to buy inexpensive technology, something that is under patent, you will worry about what good does that do for me? Does it cure my disease? Does it make the air better that I breathe? But very often, these technologies have positive externalities. They help not only the buyer and user, but also third parties. Posterity, for example, in the case of green technologies. When I buy an electric car rather than a diesel car, then of course I benefit a little bit. I breathe better air, but most of the benefit, 99.999%, is distributed all over the world to people around the world and people in the future. And if I don't care about those benefits, or at least not much, then I will buy the diesel car if it's cheaper than the electric car. So we should reward for those externalities as well. We should create a system in which these externalities are taken into account in the decision about whether to deploy a certain technology or not. In the pharma sector, it's the impact on the contagion, on getting other people infected, that is under-rewarded. And finally, there is the problem of misdirected research and development. Innovators will focus on the needs that rich people have, because there they can sell at high prices, and innovators are going to ignore the needs that poor people have, because poor people cannot pay these very large markups on innovations. And that's what we find. The diseases that are concentrated among the poor are ignored by pharmaceutical innovators. Diseases like TB, malaria, hepatitis, HIV/AIDS, pneumonia, measles, neglected tropical diseases. And diseases like hair loss are getting a lot of research attention because there are plenty of affluent males out there who hate the fact that they are bald and want to find a remedy that makes their hair grow again. So now let me show you what the alternative is. What am I proposing? The proposal is to add something, namely impact funds, publicly funded impact funds that would give innovators a new option. Innovators could forego their conventional monopoly privileges, and in return for that, they would get rewards that are based on the social benefit that they achieve with their innovation. Each impact fund would cover a broad domain of innovation, for example, pharmaceuticals, agricultural innovations, green technologies, or education, something like MOOCs, massively open online courses. So this is really a meta-innovation. It's innovation in how we reward and incentivize innovations. And let me show quickly how it would work. So an impact fund would be a device that would underwrite an indefinite sequence of annual disbursement. Each year there would be a pool of money, and innovators would be invited to register any innovation that they make to participate in a fixed number of consecutive annual payouts. So they would get a share of these annual pools, let's say for 6 years or for 10 years. Each of these pools would be divided among the participating innovators according to the impact that their innovations achieved in the preceding year. But in return, the innovator would have to make the innovation available at cost. So the innovator would give up all the profit that it might make through marking up the product in exchange for getting these impact rewards. Of course, you would register an innovation only if you do better with impact rewards than with monopoly markups, and that would be the case particularly for innovations that are suitable for poor people, because with such innovations you can have huge impact, let's say a drug for tuberculosis, huge impact but little profit potential on the patent track. So those innovations would be registered and would earn money through sharing in the annual reward pools according to the health gains achieved in the case of pharmaceutical innovations. I conclude by quickly highlighting the main features of impact funds. First, they are optional. So innovators have a choice. They can either register or not. And funders also have a choice. Governments can either join the system or stay out of it. If a rich country stays out of it, then monopolies remain in full force in that rich country. This optionality makes it easy to establish. We don't have to wait for every last country to agree. The countries that want to join the system join it, and other countries hopefully join at a later time. The main idea is delinkage. We delink the price of the innovative product from the cost of research and development. We only charge people for the cost of actually producing the product, the marginal cost of production. We pay for performance, so we supplement the price that the innovator collects for the product. We supplement it by a performance premium, which is based on the good that the innovation does in the world. So the patient pays only for the production cost of the pills, and the company gets an additional premium based on the health gain attributable to its product. There is an objective measure of value. In the case of pharmaceuticals, this would be health impact, gain in health. In the case of green technologies, this would be emissions averted, measured in CO2 equivalent. In the case of education, it might be gains in skills and employment. And in the case of agricultural innovations, it might be gains in nutrient yield per acre or gains in pesticide use avoided or fertilizer use made unnecessary. So we reward on the basis of an objective measure of value. Contributions would come from states. States would finance these impact funds, and they would contribute in proportion to their gross national incomes, with richer and larger states contributing more. That means that affluent taxpayers would pay more towards sustaining these impact funds, and that's really exactly like it is under the patent system. Under the patent system, it's early users that pay for the cost of innovation, but there is one very big difference. The big difference is the patent system, by making early users pay, excludes the poor. The poor don't have the money to participate. They cannot afford drugs at high prices so long as they are still under patent. Under the impact fund system, poor people can participate right from the start. They can afford the medicine right from the beginning because the price of the medicine is low. The innovation is paid for from impact rewards, and these are paid by the richer governments. The system is competitive. It works on the basis of competition with these large annual reward pools that are divided according to impact. And here a drug that has more impact or a green innovation that has more impact receives more reward money than an innovation that has smaller impact. So it's a competition which doesn't really have winners and losers, but a competition where those who achieve more with their innovative product also get larger rewards. A reward rate will emerge on these impact funds, so there will be a certain dollar amount per unit of impact achieved, and that rate is self-adjusting. If it is perceived to be high, then additional innovations will be registered and will drive the rate down. If it is low, innovations will not be registered, and gradually the reward rate will rise as existing innovations will exit the system. So this automatic self-adjustment reassures both innovators and contributors that the reward rate will always be at a reasonable level. Now think about how impact funds would revolutionize the thinking
Professor
of innovators.
Thomas Podge, you have
our
like
world,
2 minutes, please.
Innovators, yeah?
About 2 minutes, please.
Yes, easy. In our world, innovators are jealous spies. They scour the whole world to make sure that nobody uses their innovation without permission. They are trying to avoid anybody getting access who hasn't paid the very high prices for the innovation. With impact funds, innovators would have the exact opposite incentive. They would go around the world and say, please use my innovation, use it for free. I help you how to set it up. I help you to get the most benefit out of my innovation. Because the more good my innovation does, the more I earn, the more money I make. In premiums that I get from, not from the customer, but from the impact fund system. So innovations would spread like wildfire. They would be much more widely used and of course have much more impact. Just imagine how much better we would do against climate change and how much better we would do against COVID-19 if we had this sort of a system instead of the present monopoly patent regime. The impact fund system aligns profit and value. Innovators get paid exactly in proportion to how much value they create with their innovation, and value is measured not by ability to pay, but by health gains or emissions reductions or some objective standards. Innovators do well by doing good. And finally, again, this is a meta-innovation. It's an innovation in how we govern innovation, how we reward and incentivize innovation, and it can be used anywhere where willingness and ability to pay is a bad measure of value, and where we have an alternative, uniform metric of social value that we can use as the basis for rewarding innovations. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Thomas Podge, for your presentation. As we are behind time, I will welcome just 3 questions, short questions to Professor Thomas Podge. 1 question here, and then we have another from the 2 gentlemen in front here.
Thank you, Professor Podge, for thought-provoking presentation. My question is based on the proposal about the impact fund. What is the loom of going local? For example, adopting local technologies, for example, in